Kapuskasing has been facing hard times as the result of the troubles of its industrial mainstay, Spruce Falls Power and Paper. The town's mayor, Ted Jewell, has been one of the key players in putting a deal together between Kimberly-Clark, which owns the mill, and the committee of gallant employees who have pledged $14 million toward modernization of the plant. Mr. Jewell, who chairs that committee, is black, Anglican, English-speaking, and his courtesy and manners are reminiscent of another time. Kapuskasing is white, Catholic, and predominantly French, and a rugged frontier community. Yet for all these apparent differences, he is deeply respected for his honesty, integrity, hard work, and above all, his unflinching leadership.
I have done a very good job as mayor of Kapuskasing, and I'll tell you why I say that. Because I've done the best I can, and my best is really quite good. I'm not a modest politician. I'm not a modest politician. It doesn't bother me one bit to sit here and tell you that. I think if people wanted modesty in their mayor, they'd have appointed somebody else to do it. Somebody who can adapt him or herself to the terms and the business of being humble at all times. I think we have too many people in politics who are of modest abilities, but then many of them have a great deal to be modest about otherwise than just their abilities as politicians. I think that people deserve something better than mediocrity, and I've tried to give them that. In my case, they have chosen me for my judgment, not to go around taking surveys and polls and asking the people, what do you think about this? The people have elected me because they trusted my judgment. And when they no longer trust my judgment, they get somebody else. But this business of running around consulting with everybody constantly, to me, is wasteful. I think it weakens the system and leads to too many decisions which are made on a swamp. They are uncertain, built on a sandy foundation, and such a house will fall, such a decision will fall, it can't stand. I think one of the fundamental requirements which must be met and sustained throughout the whole process is basic honesty. I think we, as municipal politicians, have greatly underestimated people. People can stand a negative reply. No is no, and I believe that they'd be perfectly contented with it, providing it's justified and reasonable. It's the right thing. When a decision is made at any political level, there are only three requirements as far as I'm concerned. Number one, is it right? Number two, is it legal? And number three, is it going to benefit the people? And if that involves saying no, then I think the people can live with that once it's explained to them. One of the things I would try to do is to make a distinction between honesty and truth. Just because one is truthful, one isn't necessarily being honest. That's the first thing. Now, in direct application to a political situation in municipal politics, or once again at any level of politics, I think that I would try to make certain that I have all of the information and then weigh that information and make a decision. That decision itself contains the seed of honesty. It must. I think also that to be honest is not a very demanding task. I really don't. I think it simply involves knowing myself. And I was going to say knowing what's best for the people to whom I'm speaking, but that I can't say because I don't necessarily know what's best. But I know what I think is best. I was chosen for that purpose, to exercise my judgment, not to do what I think the people may think they wanted at an appointed time. Speaking personally, I will run straight as a die with truth, and I will run with honesty. And if that isn't good enough, then get somebody else to do it. Kapuskasing as an anachronism, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. That there's no doubt that towns like Kapuskasing, which are single industry towns, are going to have to be changed. The changing may be positive, it may be negative. If it's negative to the point where the downsizing of a community with its single industry cannot be controlled, then the town itself will simply become a ghost town and disappear. It's as simple as that. It will become as dry grass blowing away in the wind. I mentioned a single industry town. I think many people who don't live in the north in a single industry town have no idea what it is like. It's not there is a feeling which nags at you constantly, and the question which accompanies it is, what if? What if this industry collapses? Industries don't collapse. That has been Canadian Ontario thinking for a long, long time. How can it collapse? We're here. They do a good business, but they do collapse. And we know that now as a result of the recession, because of the shrinking paper markets. All of these changes have taken place, and they're impacting single industry towns. When you lose 120 jobs in a single industry town, it's a totally different story from what it is if you lose the same 120 in southern Ontario, in Hamilton, London, Sarnia, Toronto. Those 120 may, in fact, probably will be absorbed into other jobs without the community. They will be absorbed. Not so in northern Ontario. When you lose 120 jobs, those jobs are gone forever, and the impact of that many jobs on any size community is like a torpedo hitting the side of a ship. The ship doesn't sink, but it's badly crippled, and the economy shrinks accordingly. There's a ripple effect, which is felt immediately, not over a period of time, within hours. That effect is felt throughout the whole town. The Kapuskasing, we have had a dreadful crisis facing us. What was dreadful within that crisis, and I mustn't overlook this, was the fact that it took so long to resolve. It started last year, and there was a danger. We're a single industry community. Primarily, we have General Motors, cold weather testing plant there, and some other plants there. But the major industry is Spruce Falls Power and Paper Company. Last year, we were told that there would be a very great downsizing from some 1,500 workers to 250 workers, or the plant would close altogether. We're talking of a loss of an additional 7,200 jobs on top of that. That would devastate the economy of northeastern Ontario. Make no mistake about that. One of the first things that happened, and it was almost incidental, the president of the Woodworkers Union turned to the president of Spruce Falls and asked him, well, why won't you sell this huge facility, this pulp and paper mill, to the employees? And he said, yes, we will. Now, what are we going to do about it? And from that point on, the unions themselves organized, and they set up what was called the Purchasing Employee Group, PEG for short, and they needed an independent, neutral chairman, something I found it very hard to be, especially as I intended to influence everything that went along.
Vision set out 4 years ago to bring a friendly and human dimension to television. And like any good friend, we try to be thoughtful and provocative. We also try to provide alternatives and suggest and encourage action. As a friend of Vision, you can support us.
A high school teacher who at some time or another probably taught almost everyone in Kapuskasing. But when he was just starting out as a teacher in southern Ontario, he was told he could not expect to teach in the mainstream of white society. Ted Jewell appreciated being told the truth.
I was seeking a teaching position. There is some humor attached to this, too, you know. I can remember applying to my hometown, and the chairman of the board, a lady doctor, came to visit, and she told me that, now, we have never had a Negro teacher here, but we'll help you get a job up country, and you go from school to school teaching music. Well, that isn't what I wanted at all. And I thought to myself, how kind of her to come and tell me this truth, that no, you will not be teaching here, but you can teach up there. We are not ready for you. Now, in the light of 1991, I think people would say, oh, isn't that a terrible thing to say to anybody? But that was then. This is now. And at that time, I looked upon that as an acceptable truth. that she wasn't going to be put into a position where the whole structure of education was questioned. I'm not so sure that people would have questioned, but she wasn't ready to take that risk, and she was good enough to come and tell me the truth about it. I appreciated that. I appreciated that very, very much. In those days, at that time, in that place, the system did not allow for this. There were no Japanese, there were no Chinese, there were no blacks. In fact, if I remember correctly, there weren't even Catholics teaching in the public system at that time. And I think that I was perceived as attempting a breakthrough, and they just weren't ready for that at that time. Shortly after that, though, the whole thing changed. I remember when I first came north, in fact, I hadn't even arrived in Timmins, and there was a lady on the train named Sue Meadows, and she told me two things. She said, "You work hard up here. Life is hard." And she said, "Never ask questions about people's backgrounds. People are in the North because they have chosen the North." Now I come back to your word exile. Some of them had self-imposed exile, and I don't know what they were escaping from, because I followed her advice and never asked. That's one of the advantages of living in the North. Now that has changed, because now we have all sorts of academic people living in the North, and all sorts of clever, educated, highly trained people, and the new technologies have displaced some of the old hands-on workers that we used to have. I remember Miss Jessie Hill had been my music teacher and my mentor for many, many years. She was a very tall, gaunt, elegant lady, and she told me, "Now you shall do this, and you shall do that, and you shall do the other thing." And those three shalls were, you shall go north to teach, you shall be the organist and choir director at First United Timmins, and you shall be a good teacher. You shall, this sort of thing. She made no bones about it. So I was dealing with truths all the way through, and I hope I've lived up to them. I must tell you this, I didn't look upon it as an exile. As a matter of fact, I'd never looked upon it as anything. I was totally indifferent to Northern Ontario. It meant nothing to me at all. What I was not indifferent to was the amount of money they were going to pay me to come north and teach, and that was a very strong factor. I've mentioned to you how glad I am that I did come north, and I believe that all of these things in one's life fit in. They all fit in. And I did not look upon it as an exile. I looked upon it as a grand opportunity to grab hold of what's in front of me and make the best of it. And I've had a happy, good life in Northern Ontario as a result of that experience as well. Young people in a school situation are busy growing up. And while they're busy growing up, they're being terribly abrasive. And they're doing all sorts of wrong things as they test the parameters of life. And they're finding out themselves. During that process, I think they do a lot of foolish things and make a lot of mistakes. Now, any specific example would do. To me, that is a matter between that young person of 17 and me. One of the things I was always unwilling to do was to involve the parents. The question in the back of my mind was, what good will this information do that parent to discover that his son has committed this dreadful act, which in itself meant nothing, okay? Because if you treat it in isolation, it will pass, and life is going to go on, okay? So I used to ask myself, is it worth involving the parents and making them unhappy? I can remember going into situations in a classroom and turning to an 18-year-old and saying, "Your homework isn't done." Well, there's no information there. He knows that already, that idea. And I would try to think of something to give him, to make him a changed person relative to the subject at hand, which in this case was homework. So I think as a teacher, as a leader, and even in the classroom situation, it behooved me to see that he was better when he left me than he was when he came into me, or a changed person anyway. My childhood was a very happy, safe, and secure childhood. There were the best of parents and an older brother and two younger sisters. We were raised with countless aunts and uncles and cousins here, there, and round and about. The point I'm making is that there was a good family support system in place. Education and religion were both valued and respected in our house. Consequently, Sundays were spent wearing woolen trousers and a white stiff shirt to church in the morning, Sunday school in the afternoon, and church again at night. Insofar as education is concerned, nothing in our daily lives is allowed to impede that. Evenings were spent in homework and then family games, believe it or not. We lived in a vast house, and we used to play hide-and-go-seek with our parents and grandparents, and everybody would play hide-and-go-seek. Well, then, coming back to education, we were brought up through the elementary system, the secondary system, and then the decision was made that we would go off to university, and so we did. And I went to Toronto and to London and Chicago, and at each step of the way, it was for both my people and for my family. That this had not, we were the first generation of this particular family to go beyond, in fact, beyond elementary school for that matter, and we were pushed all the way there and assisted greatly by our parents. I remember the return fare to Toronto on the CPR was $1.20, and that was one way, and I can remember Dad being unwilling to spend that money, so he got me a pass. He was a railroad man, you see, so I would go down to Toronto and then come back. And then there were my studies in music, and I won a scholarship, and this helped the academic portion of it greatly. My father never understood why the money was never seen from the scholarship within the family coffers or anything like that. He knew there was a sum of money won. Well, where is it? This idea. So this had to be explained repeatedly to him, that it wasn't being wasted. Everything was accounted for. By my people, I meant black people in general, that somewhere there has to be role models, there has to be a success. There was a time, as you well know, within the past, 50 years, where these role models existed in the United States and perhaps parts of South America, but not in Canada. Things were good in Canada, and it's certainly not any bad thing against the people who with whom we were raised at that time. But the people in Canada, the black people in Canada, had not taken full advantage, in my opinion, of all that was open to them. And our parents had determined that the advantages are there and we're going to use them. But there was nothing underhanded or offensive about it. It was simply taken for granted, that's all, that you will do well. We were told, quite frankly, that we had to do better than white people did because we were black, and that's the only time you will be respected. And so we set out with that in mind. There was no loss. There was no loss of dignity. There was no loss of time, which was essential, of course, because, you see, if we wasted time, we were therefore wasting money. You couldn't afford a lost year at university. It wasn't even considered. It didn't enter into the plan at all. But it was intended that you will do well, and then you will do better than the others. Then you will be respected. Our people will be respected at that time. And it's your job to see that this happens. I am strongly opposed to quotas of any sort, or special allowances for people. Everyone must stand on his own merit. If he can't rise to the occasion, then he must fall by the wayside. And there's only one question that matters. Can this person do the job? Is he qualified to do the job? Will he do the job? Is he a proven track record? Now, he can't have a proven track record until, of course, he's been given a chance. But I don't know many people who haven't been given a chance. Maybe they failed to pick up that opportunity when it passed. And that's exactly what happened. It passed and kept right on going.
In his position as mayor, Ted Juul's often aloof manner belies a compassion and an understanding of his responsibilities that suit him admirably for the job he has been elected to do. He knows he's an outsider, but this fact does not disturb him. The distant voices he respects have nothing to do with acceptance.
I don't think that people on the so-called outside are any better or any worse than anybody else. I don't think they require special treatment, but I do think that they need the opportunity to enter into the lively competition which does exist. And if they can't hold their own on their own merit, then those people must be allowed to fall by the wayside. They must fall by the wayside. We can't clutter it up with a collection of mediocrities who are going to set themselves up as leaders. I make it a point to treat people, I hope, with distant courtesy, and I intend for them to pick up from that while I like you, you are not my friend. And as a leader, I have to go, there are certain things I have to do alone, and I don't intend to be put into a position where I am lunching with you, dining with you, drinking with you, being your friend. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 4 o'clock tell you to get busy. You have not done something or other. That is unacceptable. You can't change that quickly. It's not fair to the other person. So I treat everybody, and always have, with distant courtesy. But this stems back to our upbringing as children, okay? And in that sense, I hope, I live in isolation in large part, but I have direct contact with everybody around me, those I need. And as they are needed, I use them, and people give me freedom to do this. Furthermore, that manner which you have just described gives me tremendous freedom to act, and I don't have to compromise on anything at all. I don't think the people want that compromising attitude or a set of compromises which are built on weak foundation. So, yes, I do treat people, I hope, once again, with distant courtesy, and I hope some element of kindness, if I can work it in. If I can't, then the kindness goes out and we'll be practical and sensible.